record this and hopefully have good sound quality and I can upload it. I guess I'll just put it there. All right. So what I've done is when you emailed me a question, I bolded it. Oh my gosh, what is it? That's annoying. That's really annoying. Okay, so I bolded it. So I'm going to just, in the time we have, I'm going to go over the bold sections. If we have time left over, I'll take additional questions. Okay, that's annoying. Okay, so one of the first questions were, how were the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods different? Right? How were the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods different? Okay, just a reminder, what does Neo mean? New. So what does Paleo mean?
Old.
Right, and Lithic means stone. Right, Lithic means stone. So you want to remember, these are all Stone Age. Right, so that's the key thing to first of all remember, these are all Stone Age. Once people start using bronze, the Stone Age is over. Once people use another material to make their tools out of, the Stone Age is over.
So the periods are marked by what the tools are made of?
I'm sorry?
The periods were marked by what the tools were made of, and then as you went to the Neolithic period, and then at the Stone Age got more complex or...
Right, exactly. During the, well, let me come back to that. Right, well, that's one difference, right? That's the question. How are the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods different? And what I did was actually, I checked the PowerPoint just because I wanted to show you how I prepared these questions. Right, so this will help you to go back and review. So I gave a list of things that made the Paleolithic period different. So here, Jackie, I would kind of point to, in the Paleolithic period, they used simple tools made of stone, of course, bone, and other natural materials. And the key word here is simple. In the Neolithic, they use more advanced tools, such as these. Right? And this is how I try and use images to help you remember. So Neolithic, it's new, it comes after old. They get more advanced tools. The people here in the Paleolithic lived mostly by foraging and hunting. What were Neolithic people doing?
Domestication and agriculture.
Right, domestication of animals and agriculture. Right, so one of the big changes, they're still using tools, but one of the big changes is how they're getting their food. Right, how they're getting their food. And this is related to the second question. So the Paleolithic people lived in family bands and moved around a lot. Where did Neolithic period people live?
Settlements.
They lived in settlements, right? You want to live near those animals, you want to live near those crops. Makes your life a lot easier. It's easier to take care of them and so forth. One thing they both shared, though, was religion. Right? They both shared religion. That's one thing that kind of was a constant for them. And then I had the same thing we did with the Neolithic period, right? More advanced tools, agricultural revolution, domestication of animals. This allowed a population increase, growth of settlements, and all that. Fun stuff. And I also try to emphasize they had increasing social organization, division of labor. Things get more complex as you have more settlements. And you also had, when you have division of labor, people become specialized. So you had, this person's going to spend all their time making fish hooks, this person's going to make arrowheads, this person's going to grow food, and they'll all trade them together. And of course, the Stone Age ends, depends on the region, but usually about 2500 BC, and that's when the Bronze Age begins. That's when you start having these Bronze Age tools. So again, that's a way that can kind of help you to study. I just want to show you this is how I'm thinking this when I make the test. Okay, I look at these, I look at how things change. And so one thing I may say to you is, which of these following statements is true? And then I'll say things about what the Neolithic period did and what things the Paleolithic period did. And you'll have to identify the true statement. Or I may say, which is the false statement? Or I may say, which of these is not a characteristic of the Paleolithic period? So it's important. This is how I can get a lot of information in just one question, why you may have to want to really think deeply about it. The next question was, what was the relationship between the agricultural revolution and the domestication of animals? Anyone want to take a shot at that? Yeah, Abby?
The animals could eat the leftover, like what they couldn't harvest from the crops, and they would also fertilize the fields.
Right.
There after they.
Right. And what was the other thing that they could do? That
they could plow the fields. They could be used to plow.
I'm
sorry, I didn't mean
No, that's my fault. So, exactly. And just to repeat, right, animals and plants were kind of working together. We can say their relationship was complementary. I don't mean they complemented each other. That would be complementary with an I. Right? It was complementary with an E, which means that they help each other out. They kind of cooperate. You have animals. Animals can eat things like corn cobs, stubble from the crops, corn husks that we can't eat. Then they can transform that into fertilizer, which we can use on the next round of agriculture. And then also, as Chris and I point out, you can hook them up to a plow. They can plow things a lot better than we humans can because they're a lot stronger. So these are complementary. They go together, right? They're not opposed to each other. It's even difficult to kind of tell which one came first. The key thing is that they're kind of working together and they support each other. What were the marks of civilization then? There we go. This is what were the marks of civilization. Right? This is how if you go through. So I said that civilization literally refers to cities, living in communities made up of cities. Now, not everyone is going to live in a city, but we use that term anyway. And when I use that term, I want to stress I'm not making a value judgment. I'm saying you have more of these things. So if you have a complex society where there's not everyone's just a hunter, not everyone's just a farmer, there's lots of people with different kinds of occupations, governed by that has a government. It's not just like a family. It's not just like, oh, I got to listen to that guy because he's my dad or he's my uncle. It's I have to listen to him because he's the king. They have highly developed economies where lots of people are trading, bartering, and so forth. They have all-encompassing worldviews. Oftentimes these are religious worldviews. We gave lots of examples of this as we've gone on. One of the first things we've noticed in civilizations, human beings like to be creative. We like to make beautiful pictures. We also tend to have, at least in early humans, tend to be religious. They also, again, like I said, they like to make pictures, advanced culture. Right? We had all those cave paintings we looked at. And they also engage in writing. Right? They also typically are able to write things down. So again, these are the marks of civilization. And this is the perfect question, by the way. When there's 4 or 5 things, it's really easy for me to make that which of these does not belong question. Right? I pick 3 true ones and 1 false one that I make up. So, and I say, which one of these is not a mark of civilization? And then you have to choose the false one. Okay, exactly. So a couple people had questions moving on to the rise of the state in Southwest Asia. Right? One of the questions was, what was the historical significance of the civilizations of the Fertile Crescent despite the fact that they went into decline? And that's kind of a tricky one because that was based on a video that I showed you. I tried to like I said, the videos aren't meant just to be like, okay, this is fun. They're meant to try and impart to you something that's kind of difficult for me to impart myself. Right? So does anyone recall this video and what the answer is? Oh, yes, Lou.
I remember in the video, didn't they say that they had farmed the land to the point that it just became desert?
Right.
That's why they declined.
Well, it's not why they declined. It's even though they declined, why are they important? Yes, Kristen.
I put that the significance was that this how civilization entirely began. City-states population had to figure out cities, houses, and created that kind of society. Is that right?
That's close. It's close. They're developing all those things. You're right. They develop agriculture and domestication of animals and allows them to develop all those things. And then it makes them significant. What makes them then significant after all those things fall apart?
That their culture got carried to that was my, I know I submitted that question. Is it because their culture got sent everywhere else after that? Like it went east and it went west and it influenced the rest of.
Excellent. Yes, that's correct. Right. Excellent. Kristen and Jackie, you're both right. That was. Yeah. No, I'll repeat it. Thanks. So what the answer was, right? As Kristen pointed out, these people in the Fertile Crescent were the ones who really were the first people to figure out this agricultural revolution and this domestication of animals, and to do it really, really well. And as Kristen pointed out, that led to them to build these very advanced civilizations. Now, those civilizations eventually decline, in part because they could no longer, for example, irrigation leads to buildup in salt in the soil, and you can't have as much agriculture then. And as Jackie pointed out, though, even though these civilizations decline, that knowledge, the knowledge of how to farm this way, the knowledge of how to domesticate animals in that way spread. Right? That knowledge spread. And I remember that the one reason I like the video, I don't know if you remember, there was those arrows showing how they spread, how they had the same latitude. So that knowledge spread into northern Africa, including into Egypt, and then made the pyramids possible. And they talked about that. It makes the pyramids possible. It also goes into southern Europe, and they'll spread to the rest of Europe, and then east into India. Right, so that's this, and this I like to focus on things like this because this shows how this area that was very powerful at one time, but not for very long, did play a very significant role in world history, not just in the history of that region, but it spread out. So is that clear? Any questions on that?
So it's just, I have that they were important because the survivors spread out and they took their knowledge of agriculture and other aspects of civilization to wherever they went.
Right, exactly.
All right.
Exactly. And even when there weren't necessarily survivors moving, the knowledge moved.
Okay.
But also sometimes, they left because it was hard to do, or to live there. Several people asked this question: what was the fate of the Hebrew kingdoms and people? And one thing I just want to stress, first of all, is the fact that I noticed that I separated them. The kings and the people, kingdoms and the people. Those are two separate entities in a sense. And that's one thing I was trying to focus on. So, remember, question? I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. So the question was, so we talked about this, and I first of all, I mentioned that, the Bible, you can use historically. It does provide historical information. You have to read it critically, you have to read it carefully, but we can come to some knowledge of what the Hebrew people were like through looking at the Old Testament. And I mentioned that they start off as these nomadic pastoralists. They're people who roam around, take care of animals, that are enslaved by the Egyptians. They're led out of Egypt by Moses in the 13th century. And remember, you have this image of I'm sure you've all seen like a picture of Moses receiving the 10 Commandments. And what's important about that is that that's giving them an identity. Right? We are the people who receive these 10 Commandments, and our identity is based on this deal. A covenant is basically a deal that they've made with God. Right? And then they put these tablets in the Ark of the Covenant I talk about. They carry that around with them, and eventually they'll put that in the temple. But what's key here, what I'm trying to stress is, you have a group of people who don't have a government, but they're bound together by the same religion. And it's a religion that won't let them worship other gods. Right? Once you start worshiping those other gods, you lose your identity over time. And that's one reason if you read the Old Testament, there's always this fear about worshiping other gods. Not only does it make their God, Yahweh, angry, there's also a fear that they'll cease being Hebrews if they do that. But like I said, key here, these people don't have a country yet, or they don't have a government yet. They don't have a state yet. But they have an identity. And so this is the Hebrew people. They're still people without a state. And that's because their identity is given to them by religion.
So they don't have a state. but
At this time.
They're like a nationality of people bounded by the covenant, even though they don't have a state.
Exactly.
But I understand who they are, but what is the fate of them? Like what?
Okay, right, I'll come back to that. So, no problem, no. So then, like I said, they do eventually, this is why I talked about Saul, right? They get a king, they eventually become a kingdom, and then I talked a little bit about how this progressed, right? David actually takes the city of Jerusalem, which then becomes the capital of this Hebrew kingdom, and then Solomon builds this beautiful temple for the Ark of the Covenant there. So they're a kingdom, they're doing great. They're a people with a kingdom. But then, and I won't go into all the details, remember, their kingdom is destroyed. Well, first of all, I'm sorry, it's split into two parts, but then it's destroyed. The Assyrians destroy the first part, the first half, and then the Babylonians destroy the second half, and they take the Hebrew elite people and make them leave. Is this the end of the Hebrews? No, they're still around, even though they've lost their government. They're still around for King Cyrus. Remember, King Cyrus is this guy building this amazing, huge empire built on tolerance. Right? He tolerates these people, he lets them go home. Even though they've lost their government, the Hebrew people still exist. So they're an example of how you have some people like the Assyrians. The Assyrians have a government, and then their government's destroyed, and then they're gone. The Hebrews start off without a government, form a government, their government gets destroyed, but they're still around. They still have that identity because of their religious belief. I spent a lot of time talking about the Hebrews, because then when we talk about the Romans, we'll talk about the rise of Christianity, and you can't understand the rise of Christianity without understanding these guys. So does that answer the question? Okay, so their fate is, even though their kingdom is destroyed, because of their belief, because of their religious identity, they still exist as a people.
And Cyrus allows them to come back eventually and
Exactly.
rebuild the temple.
And they'll rebuild their kingdom, and that's why you still have this memory. That's why there's a state of Israel today, is because you still have this memory. And let's see. People ask about some of these bold terms, so I'll just say a couple things about them. Cuneiform was the alphabet used by the Babylonians, the Fertile Crescent. So this is the alphabet used on the Fertile Crescent by the Babylonians.
Is this the one, what's the language that English is?
Phoenicians.
Phoenician?
Phoenicians, yes. No, exactly, and that's where that's good you bring that up, because this is where people can get messed up very easily. Because,
Hooked on
and this-
phonics. That's what I remember Phoenician.
that's a good way. I don't know if you heard that. Jackie just had a trick that she used to remember that she says hooked on phonics. I don't know if you've ever seen commercials for that program or anything like that. That's how she remembers it, that that's connected to the Western alphabet.
So,
Usually the funnier the ways that you can remember these things, the better. It'll stick in your mind. Yes, Abby.
so cuneiform was the language that was used in the Fertile Crescent, and Phoenician is the one, where was Phoenician used?
It's actually about where modern day Israel is today.
Okay.
And then they
And
spread it
that's
to southern
Okay,
Europe, which is how the Romans got it.
okay.
One student asked about Sargon. She tried to do extra research and it confused her because there's actually several Sargons in history. Sargon, I just want you to remember, he's the guy that goes beyond in the Fertile Crescent. He's in the Fertile Crescent, first of all. Where he's the guy that actually forms an empire of multiple city-states. He forms an empire of multiple city-states. And that's why I want you to remember him, because he's the first guy that does it, that actually forms an empire that's more than just a city-state. It's bigger. Of course, Amenhotep IV, you'll remember, was a Egyptian pharaoh. What was his claim to fame? What did he try to do?
Make everyone worship one.
Yeah,
One God.
try to make everyone worship one God. Did it work?
Nope.
Nope. Yeah, he tried to do it to get around the power of the priests, but when he died, it all fell apart. And what was his relationship to Nefertiti? Wife. So, I mean, why would we bother? She's the only woman who was married to a monarch that I asked you to remember. Why would I ask you to remember her?
She had positions of power.
Yeah, I'm sorry? Oh, close. I think you're thinking of Osiris and Isis. That's Isis. That's good though. And that's also, yeah. So that's Isis is the one who was married to Osiris and helped with that. Right. So she was actually someone who wielded power. Right, this was key. She's a woman who wields power. We've talked about several women like that. So she's actually wielding power. They talked about how in presentations of her in the Egyptian art and memorials at the time, she was even portrayed as a pharaoh or as a general conquering enemies. So she was someone who was recognized as having a lot of power and who was a very important influence on her husband. So she's an example of how women could wield power at this time. Do we know what happened to her? No, we don't know. She kind of just disappears from history. And that's kind of proof that people weren't too comfortable with her wielding power like that.
So did you say that they are King Tut's parents?
Yes. Well, actually, I'm not sure if she's King Tut's mom, but King Tut, she was married to King Tut's dad. I don't know how many wives he had and which one, but yeah. She would be the official mother in that sense. People ask who Cyrus and the Persians were. Remember, these two things are connected. Cyrus was this great king who who ruled Persia, which was much larger of an empire than anything before it. And he was able to conquer much of it and build it up, and he ruled it by tolerance. He's the only one, the only non-Jew, non-Hebrew referred to as Messiah in the Bible, because he's the one that allowed the Hebrews to return home after they were captured by the Babylonians. And so you want to think about that. He's the guy who is able to rule a massive empire of Persia through tolerance. And the last one, does anyone recall, who are the Hyksos?
They
Right.
brought down the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah, they're these raiders, these people who come and attack the Egyptian Middle Kingdom and cause its decline. Now, I don't expect you to remember all the difference between the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. I do want you to remember, though, that two things about that. One is that that shows how they're kind of fragile. Just people attacking them from the outside can weaken them so much they fall. But also it's important to remember they came back. As Brianna pointed out, it's the Middle Kingdom. There's going to be another kingdom after the Middle Kingdom. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it the Middle Kingdom.
So that's what we need to remember, is that they kept coming back.
Right, exactly. The Egyptians, because of their strong identity, especially based around their religion,
Right.
That's why I talked a lot about the pyramids, helped them to come back. So excellent. Okay, any more questions on that before we proceed?
Babylon, What's the significance of Babylon? I thought that's not the Persian capital, is it?
Right, that's the,
They
Right.
expel the Hebrews and they get beat by Persians, right? They
Right,
expel the
right.
Hebrews and they get beat by Persians, and then Cyrus led the Hebrews.
Okay, so the Babylonians were the ones that drove the Hebrews out of
well,
Israel.
also one thing to remember important about the Babylonians is that they're ruled, for a time, they're ruled by Hammurabi.
Okay.
And Hammurabi's the guy that, he's, like I said, he rules Babylon, the city-state, and he gives the law code, right, this public law code. And he ends up building an empire that lasts. Sargon's empire doesn't last very long. Hammurabi's does, in part because of the law code, but also because, you remember, he worshipped only one, he worshipped each city-state, right, he worshipped Marduk. Each city-state had its own city god, and he made all the other city-states, he let them keep their god. He wasn't like, okay, you have to get rid of your gods, but he said, you have to worship my god too. Right, you have to worship my god too. And because of that, he was able to build a large empire that lasted a significant amount of time.
So we just say Babylon and Hammurabi are connected? 'Cause that's how I define Hammurabi, that he ruled Babylon and he had public law code.
Yeah, but also you want to remember about the religion of Marduk and all that.
Okay.
Okay? Any more questions on that before we proceed? Okay, moving on. Okay, we did that. Okay, the foundations of Indian society. People had a lot of questions about this. Okay, what was the connection between Brahmanism and social status and social order? Well, remember, this connects back to one of your terms, Varnas. Right? Remember, I told you this legend about the giant who was killed, and then different groups of people came from different body parts?
Okay.
So, the Varnas, that's part of Brahmanism. And remember, where you were on that Varna system was based on your karma. If you had good karma, you were on top. You'd done good things, so you're being rewarded for it. If you had bad karma, you were on bottom, and were being punished for what you did. So that encouraged, first of all, that determined, right, social status. This Brahmanic system of ritual purity in their religion determines what status you're at. But also, it keeps social order because people are told that you deserve where you're at. If you're poor and you're one of these laborers, well, you deserve it. You were bad in your previous life, so now you're being punished. Be good, listen to the Brahmins, don't resist, accept the government, and you'll get good karma, and you'll be born into a better life next time. And how, of course, can you criticize the Brahmins and the upper class people? They're just being rewarded for the good they did. So, of course, that encourages social order. So, is that clear? Any questions on that? What religious movements developed in response to Brahmanism and why? Right, Jainism is a big one, right? And that's this picture here, and I included it. I remember these guys didn't. The Brahmins, you'll recall, they said that if you want to kind of get enlightened, if you want to have good karma, you have to come to us to perform rituals for you. Right? You have to come to us to perform rituals for you. And many people didn't find that satisfying. They said, we want to figure out how to get enlightened on our own. And one example is these people, Jains, who said, okay, we're going to try and do that. We're going to do that by giving up as much as we can. We're not going to eat very much. If we're really devout, we're not even going to wear clothes, because that's kind of grasping onto things. And of course, the other big one that developed was Buddhism. Right? Buddhism develops out of a rejection of this. And in parts, remember, Brahmanism emphasizes the priests, emphasizes going to them to get help for your enlightenment, whereas Buddhism and Jainism says you can do something yourself to bring this. Now, does anyone know, how did Brahmanism change to meet this challenge? Brahmanism becomes Hinduism. Right? Brahmanism is going to change to Hinduism. And do you remember, and this is I tell stories sometimes in class. It's not just to tell an entertaining story. Well, I hope they're entertaining. But it's also to help you remember this. Remember I told you about when I would go to the apartment. In my apartment, there was the Hindu woman with offering the water each day. That's one reason. That was one of those changes. It moved away. The priests were still there. They're still important in Hinduism, but they allowed more gods, and they allowed people to have more interaction with those gods. So instead of paying the priest to perform the ritual, they developed a ritual anyone can do. Anyone can afford a cup of water. Right? You can go perform your ritual. then you stay within the system because you can do something. This is, people responding, breaking out of the old religion because it's not satisfying them. Well, this is an attempt to satisfy them by allowing them to perform the rituals themselves. Taylor.
So those three religions of Jainism, the Buddhism, and Hinduism, they all three came from the Brahmanism, or just the Hinduism state?
I would say Brahmanism becomes Hinduism.
Okay.
Brahmanism becomes Hinduism. These other religions are a reaction to it. Yes, Abby.
On the slide about Hinduism, it says something about the development of caste and age-appropriate dharma.
Right.
What is the caste is just like that's the caste system.
That's the
right?
Vardas.
Yeah. So
Right.
what is the
I decided to drop that.
Okay, so just don't worry about that.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Let's see. Nope. C. Boss had a question. Why was India unable to maintain a united government?
They weren't able to communicate, and it has like a different cultures within.
Yeah, excellent. People got it. Right, here's the slide. I should have just asked, I've just shown you the slide. Culture was one of the big things. India is very, very diverse culturally, in part because the geography is so different, right? There's forests, deserts, plains, lots of different types of geography. People all speak different languages, and it's big. So these are kind of the causes of why you have this division. Culture, language, geography, and distance. You can kind of lump them together a little, but that's how I try and divide it. Someone asked Mohenjo-Daro, what do you need to remember about that? It's the first civilization that appears in India. Or appears along the Indus River. Of course, it appears along a river. It does very well for about 1,000 years, and then just kind of disappears, and we don't know why. Someone asked us about Chandragupta and Marion Empire. Chandragupta was the guy who started the Mauryan Empire. It's, of course, associated with India. I just used an example that Indians could unite. Indians could unite at certain times, but they didn't stay united. Right? They could unite for certain times, but they didn't stay united. Right? They unite for certain times, but are unable to stay united. Now, I talked also about this guy, Ashoka. Remember, what was the story I told about Ashoka?
The dragon, a lion with bare hair.
Yeah, he's the guy that fought with the lion, right? Beat it to death with a club. And remember, he was a scary guy, right? I told you how he kind of killed his way into power, and he's part of this Mauryan Empire. He's one of the people who's going to end up leading it. Does he always stay mean and scary?
He takes on Buddhism.
Right, he takes on Buddhism. He stops being mean and scary. He accepts Buddhism, in part because he also in addition to killing his way to the top, he also invaded and conquered a lot of land. He expanded the empire. The story goes he felt bad about it, and then he decided to embrace Buddhism. Yeah, he killed some family members too. And he felt bad about this. He accepted Buddhism and hoped to try and become enlightened, and also to spread enlightenment to his people. Right? So he used Buddhism in order to help justify his rule. He said, I'm good now, I'm following the true religion, and I'm going to bring you benefits. I'm going to help you people, because I'm not just interested in it for myself. I've given up grasping. I'm going to try and serve to help you, the common people, so you should accept my rule. Of course, he gives all this money to support temples, Buddhist temples, and of course then the priests or the monks at the temple say, we love you too. Right? We're going to tell everyone how great you are. So he's using Buddhism to help him rule. But also remember, he's tolerant of other religions too. He's not trying to make everyone be Buddhist, and he'll support other religions too. Buddhism's just the main one. Yes, Jackie?
I know that Buddhism, that Siddhartha Gautama is the
Right.
future of Buddhism, but like when you define Buddhism, like do you say that, they're trying to find enlightenment by understanding the Four Noble Truths and embarking on the Eightfold Path? Or like how do you define Buddhism? How you define it?
That's the one that will work for us for now.
Okay.
It's complex, but
Yeah.
it's a path to enlightenment,
Okay.
following the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, founded by Siddhartha Gautama. Okay, excellent. Abby?
I was trying to find a slide to write something down on, and I missed what you said about Chandragupta.
Right?
Can you?
He is the person who founded the Mauryan Empire.
Okay.
And what's key about him is he shows that India was capable of uniting.
Okay.
It just doesn't last because of those other characteristics.
Okay.
So see, China's classical age. I had several people ask me questions about the dynasties. They're like, there's a lot of dynasties to remember. And that isn't easy, right? I know that's not easy. So I tried to pair each dynasty with an idea. And I'm not going to ask you their exact dates. Someone said, do we need to know the exact dates? No. You do sometimes need to know their proper order and how they related to each other. I'll give you an example in just a second. Or here, I'll give you that example now. So does anyone remember, what was the term I used to explain how the Zhou dynasty justified overthrowing the Shang dynasty? Mandate of heaven. So you need to remember, this is what I mean about order. It was the Shang dynasty that came first, and it was overthrown by the Zhou dynasty. I'm not going to ask you those exact years, but you do need to know Shang comes first, Zhou dynasty overthrows it in the name of the mandate of heaven. And of course, that's one reason it's important, is that it justified overthrowing this other dynasty. What was the other important thing about the mandate of heaven?
You had the legitimacy to rule people, basically.
I'm sorry, hand? Sorry, I hear several answers at once. Does anyone want to volunteer an answer?
It means that you have the legitimacy to rule people because you got your power from heaven
Right.
or God or whatever.
Right. And it also gave the Chinese a sense, that's true, that's one cause. The other is it gave Chinese people a sense of identity.
Oh, that's not the yellow emperor?
That's also the Yellow Emperor. There's multiple reasons for Chinese identity. So people said, China's a special place. Heaven chooses our ruler for us, right? We're special. We're different from other people. China chooses our ruler for us. The heaven chooses our ruler for us. And we still remain even when our government changes. Now going back to that question, why was because I have this kind of mirror, right? Why was India unable to form a union that lasts a long time? China was. Well, the way we can think about that is how China kind of overcame these difficulties. Well, first start with language. I really tried to emphasize something about Chinese language. What did I try and emphasize? Yeah, Chris?
That their writing is the same, no matter what area you're in. They might speak it different.
Exactly. It's a shared written language. So that's, first of all, one thing you have to remember. Shared written language. Anyone could read it. And in fact, remember, it spreads even beyond China to Japan and Korea. Okay, so that's important. Written language that lots of people can read. India never developed its own single united written language that everyone could read. And that's also key to why it manages to develop its own culture and identity. As Jackie pointed out, you have the Yellow Emperor, this mythic emperor that Chinese people see as their parent, as their father, or their great-great-great-great-grandfather, or something like that. So that's important, is that they're developing, and they're writing down in the shared written languages these ideas of things like the Yellow Emperor. Remember, you also had ideas, sorry, wrong slide. Remember, you have people in this next group, where'd he go? Sima Qian. Remember, he's a Chinese historian who writes a story about the Han Dynasty, writes his book, and that shares this that emphasizes this Chinese identity. And of course, you have all these thinkers. You have people like Confucius, Sun Tzu, Zhuangzi, whose ideas are all written down in the same language and is sharing around. So you have a shared identity and a shared culture. Geography and distance, though, are tricky, right? You can't conquer these help to deal with that. Books can travel. But what was the other big thing that I mentioned? Two major building projects in this class. Yeah, Griff?
The Great Wall and the Great Canal.
Exactly, yeah. The two greats, right? The Great Wall and the Great Canal. The Chinese are able to, using these new ideas they have that hold together their identity, things like Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism, and so forth, they're able to use that to mobilize people into gigantic building projects, such as the Great Canal. Remember, I said China's rivers flow west to east, so it's easy to move west to east. It's hard to move north-south. So the Sui dynasty said, we'll just build a wall. We'll just build a big river. Similarly, the Great Wall, they build the wall, you can travel along the wall, but also there was a concept, the people who live north of the wall are barbarians, the people who live south of the wall are Chinese.
What dynasty was it?
Sorry.
The Great Wall was the Qin Emperor, Shi Huangdi.
And the Han Dynasty, are they the ones that fought the Northerners?
The Sui dynasty is the one that did the Great Wall. The Grand Canal. The Han dynasty fought the Xiongnu.
So they expanded China's border north.
Yeah. So let's see. Are we doing, okay. I'm going to have to go a little quickly. So I got Yellow Emperor. Confucius, remember, he was this teacher who went around teaching people to be virtuous, focusing on human relationships, and that we should be virtuous. We can encourage people to be virtuous through ritual and music, not through punishing them really harshly. Ritual and music. And that's important because he would fought like mad with this guy, Han-Fei-Sa. Han-Fei-Sa believed the opposite. He was a legalist. Han-Fei-Sa was a legalist. And they taught you need to punish people really harshly. You need to be really strict with people. You need to beat down on people. And if you do that, then they will obey you. So Confucius and Han-Fei-Sa would not have liked each other. Someone also asked me, how are the Confucians and the Taoists different? Right, remember, Confucius is this guy who's wandering around trying to fix the problems that are harming China. China's falling apart. There's lots of disorder. Confucius wants to fix that. Zhuangzi is the guy who said, am I a butterfly or not? Right, remember, he has the dream, he's a butterfly, and then he wakes up and he's like, okay, am I a butterfly dreaming I'm Zhuangzi, or Zhuangzi dreaming I'm a butterfly? Withdrawal from society. Confucius says we need to fix these problems. You need to go out and fix these problems. The Taoists during this period are saying government service is dangerous. Let's withdraw from society. Right? Let's not be active in it. And a big way to remember that, that's why I told the butterfly story is strange to me. And that's a good way to remember it. It helps to think of strange things to help remember them. Okay, so how did Buddhism develop as it spread throughout East Asia? How did Buddhism develop as it spread throughout East Asia? One thing I wanted to emphasize was these monasteries. Right? That China is going to spend a lot of money to build monasteries, and it does it for a couple reasons. They donate land for this purpose. The monks are supposed to get enlightenment, so you're showing your support of Buddhism, but also it's believed that the monks will pray for you and your government, and that will make your government strong, and it will make your government last. Right, so they're there to help protect the government, protect the state, and so you're giving them this money for this. So Buddhism is spreading, and it's developing in this way. Right? This keeps enlightenment there, but Buddha didn't say much about governments. He wasn't really concerned with governments. He was concerned with getting enlightenment. But as Buddhism develops, people like Ashoka, people like the Chinese, people like the Japanese, people like the Koreans are going to use Buddhism. Both they're going to get enlightenment, but also because they believe Buddhist priests have kind of ritualistic and magical religious powers, they can protect their government, protect the state, keep it safe from invasion, and so forth. How did Chinese civilization influence the rest of Asia? What I tried to emphasize there was that China wasn't going out and conquering Vietnam, China, or Japan or Korea. It tried in the case of Korea, but it failed. It wasn't going out and successfully conquering them, but its writing spread, its ideals spread, Confucius spread, or Confucian ideals spread, Buddhist ideals spread, and Chinese forms of government spread. And of course, Chinese Buddhism spread. So they're influencing it culturally without actually taking over these countries. Right, actually taking over these countries. Let's
So
see.
did they reach through the, like, I said some with the Silk Road, because the Silk Road put them in connection with all of the other countries,
Right?
right? Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, they are certainly influencing other places that way. It's just that influence isn't as lasting, so I don't talk about it much. But you're right, they are influencing people to the West that way.
So they influence through writing, religion,
Government?
Government.
Forms of government,
Okay.
yes. But they don't take over.
Okay.
So let's see. I have about 5 minutes left, so I'll try and look very quickly at these people here in the terms list. Of course, Shi Huangdi, he's the terracotta warrior guy. Right? He's the first emperor of the Qin dynasty. Is he a nice guy? No, he wasn't. Not a lot of fun. And what was the ism? What was the worldview he followed? Legalism. Right? Han-Fei-Sa was his advisor. Did his dynasty last?
Well, for a while.
For a while. Did it last very far beyond him? No, right. It falls apart. It doesn't really work that well. It doesn't last very long at all.
Did you say he also did the Great Wall?
He's also the Great Wall guy. Lots and lots of amazing building projects, but doesn't build a dynasty that will
Is
last.
he the one that burned the Confucian books?
He burned the Confucian books and buried alive the Confucian scholars. Right. And then, of course, who were the Xiongnu? The Huns. Yeah, they're the people who are threatening the Han dynasty. And remember, the Han dynasty then, to defeat them, goes out and conquers their homeland, and then that gives them control of the Silk Road. One Empress Wu, remember, she's that Tang Dynasty empress, the only Chinese woman to hold the title emperor. She holds the title Huangdi. She's the only one that was able to rule on her own. And it's key. It's on one side that shows how far women were able to gain power in China, but the fact that she's the only one shows that there were limits to that.
They couldn't handle it.
And then when you think of Empress Wu, it also helps to think of Ban Zhao. Ban Zhao is also another Chinese woman. Remember, she's the one I told you that her dad was a historian, her brother was a historian. Dad died, right? She could read and write. She was brought in. I'm sorry? She finished her brother's book, yeah. And then she was even invited in to teach the emperor his women. But remember, she also wrote a book that told women, be quiet, be submissive, don't show off. Right? So there's also limits. So Empress Ban Zhao shows that some women were willing to accept these limits. Empress Wu of the Tang Dynasty shows that some were willing to challenge them. And even when they successfully challenged them, though, it didn't last. Let's see. On Lushan, okay, Tang Dynasty. Remember, that's the dynasty that is the most open. It's the most open, most cosmopolitan of Chinese dynasties. That's when Empress Wu was around, but it didn't stay that way. It didn't stay, or even though, like I want to stress, this was the most open, most Chinese dynasties weren't that open. And one thing that changed that was, you'll remember this guy, An Lushan. Remember, he rebelled. He was a foreigner who served as a Chinese general who rebelled and tried to become emperor himself. And after that, Buddhism declines in China because it's considered foreign, and people turn away from it. They're seen it as foreign and bad.
So he rebelled for bringing back the old ways.
No, he rebelled just to become emperor.
Okay, he just
He
wanted
wanted to be emperor, and he was not Chinese.
Okay.
He was a foreign. He was part of an ethnic group that's not normally considered Chinese. He was probably Turkish. The last two we went over very quickly. Shinto, you remember, was the Japanese religion of multiple gods. Shotoku was the prince who was a member of the Yamato clan. Don't expect you to remember Yamato, but he's related to the emperor of Japan, and he looks to China for help in building up a civilization, building writing and religion and so forth. Well, good deal. Have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday for the test.